Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Today we're going to look at Azure OpenAI. We're going to look at it from a .NET perspective, as well as the NuGet package that Microsoft's released to connect to OpenAI and Azure OpenAI. We're going to take a look at what we need to do from an Azure perspective to get the relevant infrastructure up and running. And we are going to create a very basic Azure OpenAI instance. Now, what we want to do through the series is actually get to the full point of the Microsoft demos, right? Where we use embeddings, where we look at the differences between using the chat with your own data type functionality as it is on the documentation versus what the demos do, where it's using normal embeddings and those kind of things. For today's video, however, we're going to keep it nice and simple. We're going to get going with the basics. So let's get cracking. Now, if you haven't set up Azure OpenAI yet, the first thing you need to do is go to aka.ms/OAI/access. That will present you with this form that requests Microsoft to enable Azure OpenAI on one of your subscriptions in your tenant. They're very quick in responding to this. I waited a few days and it was up and running, and it's pretty straightforward to fill out. Now that's step one, and you need to do that to actually get access to the Azure OpenAI portal. We need a few details from this particular portal. If we go to just to take a look at what we've got, I've got my deployments. Now that's my GPT-4 model that I'm working with. And to get the details that we need to actually instantiate the client, the easiest way is to go to chat, make sure that you've got the right deployment selected, and then just go view code. They've got quite a few samples, but I'm going to go to C#, that's our focus. And we can take a look at quite a few things already. But the important ones that we want to look at here is in the new OpenAI client, we've got the endpoint, which I've already saved in my app settings.json file. And we've got the OpenAI key, which we can grab from there. And we've got the deployment name, which I just saved into a variable as well. That's it. We're not going to worry too much about the rest of this. So I'm going to close that out and we're going to jump into Visual Studio quickly. Back in Visual Studio, you'll notice that I've just set up a little bit of a app settings.json file just to store some of the variables. To be a bit more explicit around what we need access to, just to show you guys, I've also got a normal GPT key, which we're going to use the same OpenAI client to connect to, which is really, really cool from Microsoft to allow us to connect to both instances. Before we do anything, we need to install the .NET package, azure.ai.openai. It is still in pre-release. It's got about 1.6 million downloads at the time of this recording. So it's gaining quite a bit of traction. It's good to see that the .NET community is jumping on board with OpenAI. I'm going to quickly install that, and that won't take us too long. Now, the first thing we need to do once this is installed is instantiate a new OpenAI client. So I'm just going to go through that quickly. OpenAI client, and the constructor gives us quite a few options. And now this is where we differentiate between connecting to Azure OpenAI and OpenAI. Now, if I just open up this, then we'll see we've got the OpenAPI key. That's a way for us to connect to normal OpenAI. And we've also got the URI endpoint with the token credential. Now, Microsoft gives us quite a few of these credential options. We're going to take a look at two today using the traditional token credential. And one of probably the best features in .NET at the moment, from my perspective, is the ability to go with default Azure credentials, which just negates secrets and connection strings and those kind of things altogether. So what we want to do first is go to instantiate a new URI based on our Azure OpenAI URL we created a minute ago. And we want to create a new Azure key credential object. So Azure key credential, and I'm going to pass in my AOI key over there. Right, that should sort us out from a client perspective, and we should be ready to go. Once you've got the client set up, then you need to create a chat completions options object. Now, I'm not going to make you watch me type all that all together, so I'm going to go and paste those options in directly from the Microsoft website, and I'm going to replace the hard-coded deployment name with the variable we've got in our app settings. Now, once we've got the deployment name sorted out, you'll notice that we've got a list of messages, and this is just to sort of start priming the conversation. You'll have three main sort of message types that you'll work. The system message, which helps define what the sort of tone of the conversation is. You've got the user message. Now that's obviously a user prompt, and an assistant message is the response we get back from OpenAI. That's pretty straightforward for us to get to. Now, once we've got that, what we want is to get a response from the client. Now that the client just goes and gets the response, comes back and brings us back some text. So response chat completions objects, it's generic. And the method that we're looking for is get chat completions. Now, there's quite a few options with this one. We could, if we go get chat completions, you'll notice we've got both normal completions and streaming, which we're going to take a look at a little bit later. And both of those have async options. For today's video, we're just going to keep it simple with the chat completions. Now, if you've ever worked with OpenAI, the object model is really interesting. To get to the actual content of the message, right? In the response object, you'll find a value object, which has basically a collection or an array of choices. And each choice has a message, and only once you've gotten to that message can you get to the content. But from that point, it's pretty much straightforward, right? I'm just going to go and console write this quickly. I've already done that. Console line like that, and then we should be good to go. But cool. All right, so there we can get the response. So yes, several AI support. All right, great. That response doesn't really matter, right? But that's as simple as that. So it took us a few minutes with explaining to get this set up. It's relatively straightforward to do to get a basic response. Now, before we get into streaming responses, what I want to take a look at is this Azure Key Credential. Now, this works great for demos, and you can put it in Key Vault and those kind of things, but realistically, from a production perspective, that's not what we want to do. Now, one of the big benefits that we get with the almost everything in Azure now is the ability to pass the default Azure credential. It's worth looking up if you haven't used it before. Basically, what that does in Visual Studio, it uses your Azure CLI credentials, and when you deploy it to an app service or to a function app, it can use the managed identity of that particular application, which is great, right? Because then we as developers don't need to care about storing secrets, or where do we store secrets, or should it be in git ignore, etc. What we're going to do is quickly just go and install Azure Identity. So .NET add package Azure.identity. All right, simple as that. And for us to change this to get rid of the key altogether is really as simple as taking out that key credential, and I'm going to go new default Azure credential. As simple as that. Now, what this does, this actually now connects to Azure OpenAI as my particular account that I'm logged into with Visual Studio. So I need to remember to make sure that I've got access. Let's quickly take a look at this, if it just still runs and it works as planned. Okay, so all right, that still works. Everything's perfect. It is now connecting to OpenAI as me, or to Azure OpenAI as me. In the beginning of the video, I said that we can connect to OpenAI as well. Now, I do not have a ChatGPT account that I can connect to from an API perspective, so I'll show you how to do that quickly. It's relatively straightforward. If I just go and instantiate a new client, OpenAPI client, and call this client, new OpenAI client. What I can pass in is the key, and there is an object we need to put in the OpenAI client options. OpenAI client options, just like that, and then this would connect to OpenAI. Now, important to note that that needs to be a valid OpenAI deployment name, so GPT 3.5 Turbo or something like that. You can get that by just going to their website. And if I go to models over here, we can take a look at this. Now, just to show you guys, if I take this and I run it into this guy over there, then mine's going to fail because it's going to say, sorry, you've reached your quota, because I've only got a free account with them. So that's going to take a few seconds to run. And then we'll move on to take a look at how would we stream information to get that similar type of experience where we get a little bit by little instead of having to wait for the whole response. Okay, so we've got this error coming back, insufficient quota. So look, it's good. It's what we expected, but it allows us to at least show that, we're connecting to a different instance than the Azure OpenAI instance. Cool. All right. I'm going to uncomment all this, and then we can get going. Now, everything stays the same, right? Apart from the fact that this response is going to look a little bit different. Now, what we want to do is take out this guy over here and take out this response over there. And effectively what we want to do is say, all right, well, go and fetch this completions streaming, right? So it's going to say, go back and come back with every single time you've got new data, bring me back something, right? We're going to say here that every time for each one of those sort of responses that it gets back, if the role has value, so if it's a user message or assistant message, then we can go and you just sort of articulate that in the console. Otherwise, just go and write the console to the app. Now you'll notice we're using write, and that makes sense because we want to make it look like a sentence and not a new line every single time. So I'm going to keep that as is. But that's really the only real difference, right? Once we've got the client and the chat completion options set up, the real difference is this chat completion streaming versus a chat completion. Do we want to wait or do we want to get the stream? You just obviously need to account for the stream. Now, when we get to actually writing this to a user interface, a React app or something like that, there is quite a little bit of work that we need to do to make sure that we account for the streaming. We're going to cover that a little bit later, but for today's video, we're going to keep it nice and simple. All right, I'm going to clear my console and I'm going to run it again. Now, what we do expect to see here is the sort of sentence being broken up into a few chunks at a time. So while we wait, just a quick poll from my side. Like, subscribe if this is helpful. I do hope to grow the channel and share some of the work that my team and I do regularly, not only with Azure OpenAI, but just generally with Azure and the Power Platform. So like, subscribe, all the normal YouTube stuff. It will really help the channel grow, and I hope to see you guys in future videos. So great, we can see here that the assistant, that's this sort of line 42 that's come across. It's put it there to say, all right, this is the assistant's response, and obviously it gives us a similar type of response. Okay, so that's it for today's video. We had a very simple introduction to Azure OpenAI. How do I get an instance of it? Because Microsoft needs to enable it. And a very quick look at how we would use the OpenAI client to go and generate some responses. Hope to see you in the next video.